help the American Red Cross. You help America.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Top Priority, where women get together to talk about what's important to them, where you'll get a unique perspective and find out what tops our priority list. I'm Deborah Roberts in New York, and today's hot button topic, paternity fraud. It's a devastating deceit that is growing, it seems, by the day. Today we're going to talk to a victim who is speaking out on Top Priority. As paternity tests get cheaper and cheaper, the statistics are becoming more and more shocking. More and more women, it seems, are lying to their significant others, telling them they are the father of their children when it turns out they're really not. In many cases, that leaves the men on the hook for thousands and thousands of dollars, but the financial damage can't even hold a candle to the emotional impact. We're joined today in New York to talk about this subject by Dr. Enrique Terrazas, who found out only after years of paying child support, that one of his children actually wasn't his biologically. In Austin, we're joined by Caroline Caskey, the CEO of Indentogene. Her company is a leader in forensics and DNA testing. And in Chicago, Jeffrey Levine, author, and he's an attorney, but he's also author of Father's Rights, hard-hitting advice for every father involved in a custody dispute. He specializes in paternity suits. Welcome to all of you today. This, it seems, is an issue that is clearly worthy of Solomon, because we're talking about an issue that is not only difficult but probably painful no matter how you look at it. Dr. Terrazas, I'd like to start with you, because when you talk about pain, I'm sure it doesn't even begin to describe what you went through a few months ago when you discovered that you were not the father of your 11-year-old daughter.
Right. It's just an emotionally devastating situation, and it's devastating for everyone involved. You know, there's a lot of victims in a situation like this. You know, beginning with the child, beginning with me as the father or presumed father. You know, it's difficult to come to grips with, you know, how the situation could have come about and what to do and how to react to it.
What led to the DNA testing in your case?
Well, I remarried, and my wife was the one who broached the subject. I mean, even broaching that subject with, you know, your new partner is extremely difficult. But, you know, she mentioned that, you know, she didn't think my second child was my biological daughter. So that led to some soul searching. You know, I spoke to my ex-wife about it, about you know, the suspicions, and initially my ex-wife, you know, denied the possibility. But after I told her I was proceeding to a DNA test, then she finally confessed that I was not the biological father.
And it must have knocked you off your feet.
Yeah, I was in shock. I was in disbelief. I really didn't know what to think at the time. It's just really difficult.
What surprises me in Chicago, Jerry Leving, I'd like to talk to you now, because what surprises me is that there are a lot of people who are falling into the category of Dr. Terrazas, and over the last 10 years there's been, what, a doubling of the DNA testing that's being done throughout the country. What's going on?
I think that's partly due to the increase in paternity fraud. There are many mothers that father shop and will pick the wealthiest father, the father most able to pay support, whether or not that father is the biological father.
Do you really believe women are being that devious, though, or are these mostly accidents?
Well, there's a combination of accidents, but also there's also deception in this, and there are people that will set up an elaborate lie to commit paternity fraud, and the ultimate victims are the children. The mothers victimize themselves, often aren't even aware of it, and they're hurting their children often. And you have many biological fathers who lose their children forever. It's very unfortunate. I spoke to one father recently who was jailed for not paying support for another man's child. And this man was devastated, not so much because he was jailed, but because he was heartbroken because he loved this child. And for years, had really believed this was his child.
Well, this is the
this,
emotional part of it, but there's also the financial part of it, too, that a lot of men are taking great issue with the idea that they're paying child support for years and not turning out to be the fathers of these children. But this has taken on such steam that it's even become an issue on Capitol Hill, where there's legislation that was being proposed that was apparently voted down, a few weeks ago. Tell us about that.
Well, the reality of it is most legislation that would be considered pro-male or pro-father generally would be voted down. I drafted legislation in the state of Illinois to criminalize paternity fraud, and that was essential to the protection of families in Illinois, and that was voted down. Unfortunately, gender bias against men and fathers does exist, and it's negatively impacting our society. Paternity fraud needs to be a crime in every state in the United States, because if somebody commits fraud, they must be held accountable, or this is never going to end, and it's hurting our society, where about 33% of all children born in America are born out of wedlock. So there's a lot of children being victimized because of this fraud.
Well, there certainly are a lot of questions, and Carolyn Caskey, in many cases you help decide those questions. Tell me exactly how the testing works, and are you being able to tell within what, a 0% accuracy rate that the father is indeed or is not the father? How does it work?
Yes, it's a very accurate test. The way we do the test is very simple, very painless for all the people who participate. We take a simple cheek swab, what looks like a long medical Q-tip, and we simply rub the inside of the cheek of each person's mouth who's going to be tested, and typically that's the mother, child, and alleged father, although we can do the test without the mother sample. And we run a DNA profile on the 3 or 2 people, compare the DNA profiles, and we can determine with 99.999% accuracy if the person tested is the father of the child tested. That's if the DNA matches, the probability of paternity will be well over 99%.
Right, and 99%
which is the legal.
I'm sorry, and 99% accuracy as opposed to 0% accuracy, which I just suggested. And you say legally, then you absolutely do know. Do both parents have to give consent before this can be done?
They don't. As long as a guardian of the child gives consent, then we will do the test, and we require authorization of that type when we require the samples.
Well, we want to continue to delve into this issue, but for now we're going to have to take a short break, and we're going to be back with more of Top Priority right after this.
Support the Boys and Girls Clubs, the positive place for kids.
Welcome back to Top Priority. I'm Deborah Roberts in New York, and today we're talking about paternity fraud. Joining us again are Dr. Enrique Terrazas, who says he was a victim of paternity fraud, Carolyn Caskey, the CEO of Identigene, a leader in DNA testing, and an attorney, Jeffrey Levine, who is the author of a book on fathers' rights. This is a subject, by the way, which we all have noticed has been fodder for tabloids, and also even a television show, Desperate Housewives, has made light of the whole paternity issue, which got a lot of us, I guess, talking and even thinking about this recently. Obviously, this is a TV program. It's kind of treated in a comical light, but there's nothing funny about this at all to people like Dr. Terrazas, who discovered recently that your 11-year-old daughter isn't your daughter. My question for you, though, is it's one thing to make this discovery, and then for a lot of men, it's all about the financial responsibility. But you're also talking about a serious emotional issue, and also the thoughts about what's in the best interest of your daughter. So is the primary issue for you right now about child support? Is it about just the truth and knowing? And how do you handle all this with your 11-year-old daughter?
Right. It's about all those issues, just truth, letting the truth be known. It's also financial. I think it's untenable for me to be paying child support to the mother, for someone else's child.
But you've known her as your daughter, though, for 11 years, though. I mean, how do you separate it out like that?
I don't separate it out like that. I want to continue to have, a relationship with her, and a loving relationship. And, I should be allowed to have the opportunity to do that without having to pay, the mother child support that someone else should be paying.
And that's the difficulty here. Jerry Leving, how do you do that? How do you separate it out and figure out what's in the best interest of the child? Because It's one thing for the man to have to bear this responsibility that's not his, but it's another thing, too, for a child to possibly go hurting and maybe even wanting in some cases. In Florida, I understand that once paternity is established, you have to keep paying until maybe the courts can figure out what's in the best interest of the child. How do you balance these things?
It's very difficult in protecting children, but fraud is not the answer, and committing criminal activity is not the answer. But one answer is having uniform laws throughout the country. Every state has different laws concerning paternity issues, and that causes confusion. It causes forum shopping. It causes some mothers to move to a new state where they believe the legal system will be more favorable to them. For instance, in California, even if a man isn't the father, even if there's clearly paternity fraud, in the right circumstances, if a man holds himself out as the dad and the child believes that, there's a doctrine called paternity by estoppel, where paternity, biological fatherhood, is irrelevant. So men can be ordered to pay child support for other men's children in California because of a doctrine which, for instance, in Illinois doesn't exist and would never exist. Now, in Illinois, we have other problems. For instance, in Illinois, there's a 2-year statute of limitations. So if a man is duped and into paying support for another man's child, if he blows the 2-year statute, he's going to likely be paying support forever for another man's child. Whereas some states don't have statutes of limitations on this issue. So the real key is we need uniform laws in every state to protect children and avoid legal confusion.
But you talk about paying for another person's child, and clearly that is what it boils down to. But you're also talking about a child who that man for many years, Dr. Terrazas, as you did, who thought, was your child. So should counseling also be a part of this? I mean, it's one thing to say there should be testing and uniformity of testing, but what about counseling? I mean, you're talking about emotions here too. Definitely,
there should be counseling involved. I mean, there's an emotional impact on various levels, on the child who's the ultimate victim of of this fraud, on the father. I went through therapy for this. I mean, it's so difficult to go through these emotions and try to deal with it and try to come to grips with, with the situation.
It's very difficult. Carolyn Caskey, are most of the cases involving young children that come before you, or do they run the gamut?
They do run the gamut, including adult children. And what I was going to say to this point is, absolutely, Dr. Terrazas feels a very close connection to this child, and he wants to maintain a relationship, as most fathers do when they face this situation. The challenge here is not biology, and does biology mean fatherhood? I don't think anybody thinks that that's the case. But the situation is, was there deception involved initially? And the way to solve it is, if there's any question, if there's any doubt at all, that should be known early on, even during pregnancy. And so as soon as that child is born, get a test, know what the truth is, and then people can make decisions with information about what the biology is. And if Dr. Terrazas had that information, he may have chosen to go on and father the child, and then he wouldn't be faced with this kind of rude awakening, so to speak, which has been a devastation for him and his family.
Right, well, it certainly has. We're running out of time. Just very quickly, Dr. Terrazas, do you think then that every child, when it's born, should be the subject of paternity testing, or is this something only in the cases of dispute, do you think?
I think there should be universal DNA testing because of the large numbers of people that are affected. I mean, I think we need to start protecting the children and protecting families, and, making sure that, the children grow up in loving environments and that there's no surprises,
right.
6 months, a year, 10 years.
And 10 years down the road,
20 years down the line, so.
Well, good luck to you, Dr. Terrazas. We thank you so much for joining us. Carolyn Caskey and Jeffrey Levine, thank you also for being with us today. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But before we go, of course, we like to always end on a thoughtful note. And today's words of wisdom come from Sir Walter Scott, who said, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." Seems pretty fitting today with this subject matter. Thanks again to our guests. I'm Deborah Roberts in New York, and don't forget to log on to abcnews.com, where you can always find